a molten mass of shadows running together in an impossible way. He blinks, trying to comprehend what the kerosene lamp sputtering on the floor is showing him. It's a woman in a red dress. She rests slender hands and arms on the chair's arms, sits motionless except for a slight trembling of shadows where her head should be. Ephraim steps closer, staring still, and finally he sees her head, huge and swollen, floating as if without attachment above her narrow shoulders. It is splotched with patches of hair and glistens where the scalp stands exposed. Sophie, who is Ephraim's sister, Sophie at that moment rises up inside him. Poor woman, poor soul, to suffer such a terrible affliction. Weeping, wailing, Sophie is inside of him, thrashing, writhing in an agony of mercy that starts to knot up every organ inside his body from his throat down to his bowels. God have mercy on this poor, tormented soul. But the woman in front of him raises her tremendous piebald head and fixes him with a gaze that is as still and steady as the ground itself. The eyes flick down his length, rise back to his face, and stay there. He shudders, shakes himself, clenches his fists, and bears down until Sophie and all her churning and torment are gone, expelled through his pores. He takes a deep breath, a full, fresh breath that feels good even in the stuffy air inside the tent. He steps forward and sticks out his hand. "Evening, ma'am," he says. "Pleased to meet you. You can call me Ephraim." Now, after that evening, he escorts her back to her car. She tells him that her name is Antoinette, not Sheba. He's impressed by her. She doesn't talk much. And after he's dropped her off at the car, he decides something that he's been thinking about. He's been trying to decide whether to run off from the show and seek his next adventure somewhere else. And he decides he's going to stay. So the following scene is the next morning. The next morning, Mr. Conger wakes him early and sends him out to the boarding house where she's staying to run errands for her, get her anything she wants. "Then get your behind back out here," Mr. Conger says. "It's not far, the walk through cornfields and past red barns and lowing herds of black and white cows. The few farmers out there working their fields ignore him. He's at the house Mr. Conger described in no time. At the back door, a skinny Negro woman in a yellow headscarf gives him a plate covered in a napkin to take up since he's headed that way anyway. He mounts a set of rickety stairs and finds the door. When he knocks, there's no answer. "Go on in," says a voice from below. The woman in the headscarf Ephraim sees when he peers over the railing. She don't never answer the door. Then she's gone, and he wonders whether he ought to barge in. What else can he do? He pushes the door gently and announces himself as soon as he has a crack big enough to stick his face in. Inside, the curtains on the window are drawn, and the room lies in shadows. It takes Ephraim a minute to make out a high bed, a low bureau, and finally a chair under the window, where she sits. "Good morning, Miss Antoinette," he says. "I brung your breakfast up." She is clad in a simple cotton dress now, faded and flowered, and in place of the elegant hat wears a soft turban that looks gray in the half-light. Her spindly hands reach out for the plate, and he gives it to her. She removes the napkin and begins eating with her fingers without saying a word. "She didn't give you no fork? I'll be right back with it." And he leaves and runs down the stairs, startling the woman in the kitchen with his demand. He's back in a flash. Miss Antoinette takes the fork, glances at him, and then begins to eat with it. Her head somehow looks larger wrapped in cloth than it did bare. He would like to touch it, not in the groping way that spectators in the tent want to, but to know about it. She is like nobody he has ever met before. She hands him the plate, half full of greasy food still, when she is done, and he takes it downstairs. Then he comes back. "Mr. Conger said I'm to fetch you whatever you need," he says. She simply stares at him for a few moments, then shifts her gaze elsewhere. The moment she does, he feels cooler, more loosely assembled, from finger bones to knees to neck, and he wishes she would fasten her eyes on him again. "Look at me, Miss Antoinette," he thinks, but he knows she won't, and that it would be rude to ask. "What are you thinking about?" He also rises to his lips, but he keeps that to himself for the same reason. It is hard to figure her. She speaks so little, and yet he cannot say that he dislikes it. He walks backward and settles himself on the bed, facing her. Then she does look at him again for a few moments, and he takes this to mean he should stay with her, so he does. Perhaps she will send him down the road into town to fetch her some of the headache powders that Sophie kept a box of in the cabinet. Or perhaps she will want him to escort her on a stroll out of doors, to take in a little fresh air in her free hours. Maybe she will have him fix a shoe whose sole has come loose, or mend a tear in the seam of her frock, read the newspaper, sing a song. Whatever she asks, he will do. But she asks nothing. He begins to fidget, wondering if he did something to displease her. He stares at her, ready to snatch his eyes away if she catches him. But after a while he relaxes, still watching her. And a while after that, he feels his breathing slip into sync with hers. He falls into a stillness that erases all his thoughts, moving inward from the little worries that surround him to all his guilt about Sophie, and home to that part of him that sits watching Miss Antoinette, who must be doing this to him somehow. And even that part of his thoughts he yields to her, and they slip away. His heart stops. He's sure of it, and it doesn't scare him. He only marvels, wishing he could raise a hand to his chest and feel the silence there. When Miss Antoinette stirs, Ephraim cannot say how much time has passed since he entered her room. Minutes? Hours? Weeks? Go on, boy, she says. Get on your way. That's it. No goodbye, Ephraim. No good day to you or anything like it. But he doesn't mind. He gathers himself and slides off the bed, not sure he remembers where the floor is going to meet his feet. But when he stands up, he is steady. And he's steady when the sun, slanting bright at him, hits his eyes on the other side of her door.